welcome back to The Explainer. So today, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to time travel a bit to the very near future, June 2028 to be exact. We're going to conduct a post-mortem on a massive economic crisis, one that was actually born from the very same AI boom that we're all so excited about right now.
And really, this whole thing kicks off with one deeply weird question that the source material poses. What if all the hype about AI is completely right? What if it's as powerful and transformative as everyone hopes? But what if that turns out to be an incredibly bad thing for the economy?
All right, let's break this down. We're going to follow the trail of 5 dominoes that tipped over, one after the other. It starts with a boom that had a hidden catch, then moves to when our everyday apps just broke. From there, it spirals into the professional world, creates a massive financial chain reaction, and ends in a crisis that, well, had no brakes.
So first up, the boom with a catch. To really get what happened, we've got to go back to the markets of 2026. Everything felt euphoric, but it was really just an illusion of prosperity. And man, what an illusion it was. By October 2026, the markets were just on fire. You had the S&P 500 knocking on the door of 8,000, the Nasdaq was blasting past 30,000, and the logic seemed pretty simple at the time. Companies were using AI to automate jobs, those layoffs were boosting corporate profits, and Wall Street saw that as pure, unadulterated good news. But here was the huge catch. On paper, productivity was going through the roof. The problem? That wealth wasn't actually getting to most people. And this gave rise to this new term called ghost GDP. It's economic output that, it shows up in the official numbers, but it never actually circulates in the real economy where you and I live and buy stuff.
And that line really gets to the heart of it. The market became completely obsessed with AI. Every single dollar of profit was just being plowed back into building more and more of it. The only problem was that the real economy, the one powered by actual human consumers, just wasn't playing the same game. So, how did this big disconnect finally start to show up in our day-to-day lives? Well, that brings us to the second domino, when your apps started to break. This was the beginning of what they called the collapse of convenience. Now, to get what happened next, you got to understand this term, habitual intermediation. I know it sounds super academic, but it's actually really simple. It just describes any business that's built on the fact that we're lazy. We stick with the brands we know, we don't bother to comparison shop because it's a hassle. For tons of companies, that little bit of friction was their entire business model. And then AI agents came along and just completely vaporized that model. All of a sudden, you had a personal assistant in your pocket working 24/7 to find the absolute rock-bottom price on, well, everything. Travel sites, insurance companies, all those subscriptions you forgot you had, even apps like DoorDash. Whole industries built on us not paying attention were the first to get wiped out. This quote from the source material just nails it. Turns out that a lot of what people called relationships was simply friction with a friendly face. The AI just removed the friction, and the relationship vanished with it. Okay, This was the moment the system-wide alarm bells should have been screaming. It's April 2027, and when Mastercard, the actual plumbing of the consumer economy, starts calling out agent-led price optimization as a reason their growth is slowing, you know this is a much bigger deal than just a few travel apps going under.
And that, unfortunately, brings us to the third and maybe the most critical domino, the white-collar spiral. This is the point where the problem metastasized. It went from being a risk to a few industries to a full-blown systemic risk for the entire economy.
Let's make this real for a second. The source talks about this story. A senior product manager at Salesforce, making a really solid living, 180 grand a year. She gets laid off, ends up having to drive for Uber, and her income just craters, down to 45,000. And this wasn't just some one-off story. This was happening everywhere.
So you take that one personal story, and you multiply it by hundreds of thousands of people, and you get this. By June of 2028, the U.S. unemployment rate had hit 10.2%. This was not a normal recession. This was a fundamental rewiring of what it meant to have a job.
And the warning signs? They were there all along. You can go all the way back to October 2026. The JOLTS report, which is the official count of job openings, was flashing red. The number of available jobs was collapsing. The ratio of unemployed people to open jobs climbed to 1.7. Think about that. For every 10 jobs available, there were 17 people desperate for one. The game of musical chairs was ending, and there weren't enough seats.
And here is why this specific type of unemployment was so absolutely catastrophic for the economy. Look at this chart. The top 20% of earners, they're responsible for almost 2/3 of all consumer spending in the US. So when you systematically attack their paychecks, you're not just trimming the fat, you're taking a sledgehammer to the very engine of the economy.
Okay, so the consumer is in a world of hurt. Let's look at how that pain created a cascade of failure in the financial world. This is Section 4, the financial daisy chain, or what happened when all the safe bets started to fail.
So the first really big crack in the dam appeared right here. A company like ServiceNow, which everyone thought was just an unshakable blue-chip giant. All of a sudden, their growth slows way down, and they announce huge layoffs. And why? Well, because their customers were laying people off, which meant those customers were canceling their ServiceNow software licenses. It was a vicious downward spiral.
And this exposed a terrifying truth. The whole financial system was basically just one giant, interconnected bet on the stability of white-collar jobs. You had private credit funds that were stuffed to the gills with loans to software companies. You had the SaaS companies themselves whose revenue was directly tied to their customers' headcounts. And then, the bedrock of it all, the $13 trillion mortgage market, was built on the assumption that those prime, high-earning incomes were safe, and they just weren't.
And this takes us to the final and frankly, the most terrifying piece of this entire puzzle. Section 5, a crisis without brakes. We need to understand the self-reinforcing loop that made this whole thing so uniquely dangerous.
So what made this crisis so different? Well, a normal recession is cyclical, right? The problem kind of contains its own cure. But this AI crisis was structural. Every improvement in AI led to more layoffs, which then just forced other companies to invest even more in AI to cut their own costs. The cause didn't cure itself, it reinforced itself.
In this slide right here, this lays out that deadly feedback loop perfectly. Step 1, AI gets better. Step 2, companies cut human workers. Step 3, those laid-off workers have less money, so they spend less. Step 4, overall consumer demand falls. So what's the response in Step 5? Companies panic and invest even more in AI to cut more costs, and the whole vicious cycle just starts over again, but faster. There was no off-ramp, there were no brakes.
Ultimately, the entire conversation had to change. This wasn't just another tech bubble bursting. The question became something way more fundamental. What in the world happens to an entire economy that's built on consumer credit when the consumers themselves are being systematically replaced by machines?
Which leaves us right here, in our fictional June 2028, staring down the barrel of the essential dilemma. If intelligent human labor becomes just another commodity, no different from oil or corn, what is the new engine for economic growth? And maybe the most important question of all, who is that growth even for?